Hello everyone and welcome to Juan Between the Pages. My name is Juan and in today's video it's finally time for the June wrap-up. I have read 9 books this month, so we're going to discuss them all in this video. So please, before starting, consider subscribing to the channel. Welcome to this new community. I'm so happy that there's people that want to subscribe to the channel, they'll like the videos, even comment on them. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's start with our video. You better call Miley Cyrus because this hair cannot be tamed. Oops, that joke. So, this video is going to have 2 different sections. In the first section, I'm going to discuss the classics that I've read this month. There are 2, Pride and Prejudice and Great Gatsby. And then I'm going to talk about the rest of the books. There are 2 books that I read that are actually novellas, so I'm not going to rank them. But the rest of the books, I'm going to rank them from 5 to 1, from least favorite to favorite book of the month. We're going to talk a little bit about them, a little review, and I'm going to give them stars according to my own opinions about the books. Please remember that every single thing that is going to be said in this video reflects my own opinions, my own experience reading these books. So if you don't agree, it's fine. There are books that are not for me, but maybe they're for you, and vice versa. So let's just talk about them and have a little discussion in the comments. So, without further ado, let's start with these 2 little things. Starting off today's video is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Oh my god, why I haven't read this book before? It's amazing, I loved it so much. And now I understand why this is a foundation to every single romance story we have read so far in history. Because it's simply amazing, it's perfectly written. The characters are so well-rounded and they're very interesting in the different personalities and how they interact with each other and how they behave publicly, how they behave privately, and the way that the Pride and the Prejudice takes place in this era in which people wanted to get married just for wealth and for a name, how some people show themselves as prideful, but then we realize that that's not the case. And the same goes to people having this prejudice on how wealthy people wear and how people from the countryside wear too. So I love this dynamic, and I love how Elizabeth and Darcy interact with each other and how their understanding of each other changes throughout the book. And I think that, of course, everyone or most people have already seen the movie adaptation, but I think this book is worth giving it a shot, even though you already know what's going on. Like, I have never watched the movie before, nor read the book. I was surprised by the way it's written. I was surprised by the characters. I was surprised of the dynamic and how it's so well executed. Of course, this book always is talking about the idea of marriage and class and how they interact with each other, how it was essential for a woman to find a husband, even though they weren't in love with them. They needed them to survive in this society that marginalized women, because if they didn't get married, then maybe they will lose everything they have and they'd be downgraded to a life of poverty. And how important it was for the women in that era to be seen by the men, right? Because getting married was the purpose of their life. And I love how this book satirized that idea, and also how Elizabeth is always like saying, okay, I will get married with someone I really like, someone I really enjoy being with. It's not just for the money, it's not just for the status. So yeah, you should read it, it's amazing. It's a 5 stars book. What can I say? Pride and Prejudice is awesome, and I can't wait to read other Jane Austen novels. Maybe Emma comes next, because I have heard a lot of great things about it. However, I have already seen the movie, so it's not going to be like a huge surprise, or I have a lot of things that I enjoyed from reading Pride and Prejudice without watching the movie. So, but I will give it a go nevertheless, so stay tuned. So, The Great Gatsby. This is a difficult one. I enjoy it, but I didn't love it. It was a fine book for me. I understand the hype, but at a certain level, I think that it's a little bit overhyped. This book tells the story of Nick Calloway. He's a Yale graduated from the Midwest who was in World War I, and then he moves to West Egg, close to New York, because he wants to be a Bond salesman. There he meets his cousin Daisy and her husband Tom, who is despicable. I hate him. And most importantly, he gets acquainted with his neighbor, this huge man named Gatsby, that everyone is like intrigued about because he's such a mystery and lives in this huge house, have a lot of money, and people think that he was a German spy, but maybe he wasn't, and why he's there. But they were all like interested in his life and attending his parties. And this book, of course, is like the representation of the big American dream. Even though there's some criticism towards race and sexuality, they're a little bit dated, and also like it doesn't resist the proof of time. There's a friend of mine who always says this to me, that this book is not current. And I get it, it's not current. And I have a lot of criticism when it comes to the way this character Tom talks about white supremacy. And there's also this whole discussion about how men should behave, and also this ambiguity of Nick's sexuality in a way that it's kind of intriguing, but I don't know if it's executed the way I will want to. Even though I get the point of Nick being the narrator, I think that he wasn't as likable as I will want to. None of the characters were actually likable to me, and I felt like detached from the story at certain points, that I wasn't like, oh, I'm invested in this, I really want to know what's happening. So I think that was a downside for me. Nevertheless, I think this is a good story. You should give it a go if you want to. Just be warned of some dated discussions and some triggering things going on in here. But I will give The Great Gatsby a 3.5 stars out of 5, just from my own experience. I'm not adding these to the whole like ranking at the end of the video, because I think that the classics deserve a different spot, because you cannot compare them. But I think that this was not my favorite, but it was fine, so let's move on. Yeah, my hair really looks awful. Before moving on to the final ranking, I'm going to mention Nick and Charlie and This Winter, both by Alice Oseman. Short stories, novellas, they're really easy to read, really quick. But I already talked about them in this video, so if you're really interested in my opinions, you should go and check it out. However, I'm going to say here that I'm going to give This Winter 4 stars out of 5, and I'm going to give Nick and Charlie 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, yes, it's ranking time. Not Morvin time, okay? So, in the spot number 5, we have One of Us is Lying, and I will be lying if I say that I like this book. So, the story follows Browning, Nate, Cooper, and Addie, who joined this guy Simon, this like of a gossip girl around school. That he has this blog and he tells everyone's secret there, and it's well known that it's him. And they all share the tension in which Simon ends up dying at the end of the chapter. It's like the first chapter is not a huge spoiler, so don't worry. This is followed by the whole investigation regarding Simon's death and how Simon had like incriminating information of every single one of these characters, so every single one could have like a motive to have killed him. So we get to know that maybe one of them is lying. But the thing is that I was never invested. I couldn't care less about these characters. I couldn't care less about their motivations, and they were plain, boring, and not my thing. The thing is that I couldn't care less about these characters. They were really basic and stereotypical in a way. Think about The Breakfast Club, but poorly executed. This is this book, mixed with a mystery story in the middle. Every single reveal and shocking moment, I was expecting it. It was really predictable. So I didn't have this huge like shock value that every single mystery story should have. And also it wasn't as compelling as other like young adult stories or coming of age stories. Also, there was a really funny resource used in this book that every single chapter is written by the perspective of the 4 main characters. Like they take turns. And I think that every single chapter ended up with a line like, "But I am not the villain, or am I?" Or, "I am not lying, or am I?" Yeah, I'm not buying it. So I really don't get the hype surrounding this book. But I know maybe why people like it, and I understand why people like it, so this is maybe a book for you. I'm sorry if we don't agree, but I will give this book 2 stars 0.5 out of 5. It was a mediocre one for me. It was like right in the middle. So yeah, moving on. So next up, in number 4, comes Solitaire by Alice Oseman. This book follows the story of Tori Spring, Charlie Spring's sister from Heartstopper, in which there's this whole mystery of this solitaire blog in school, which is always doing these pranks to teachers and other students, and Tori is like interested in what's going on with Solitaire and wants to discover who is behind it, and she's joined by this weird guy named Michael who has recently transferred to her school, so they team up in a way to discover what's going on. If you want to have a more interesting review on this book and the whole Heartstopper universe, you should watch my Alice Oseman video. So all I'm going to say is like I enjoyed this book, but sometimes it was really depressing and triggering. There's a lot of triggering scenes going on in this book, and there's a lot of topics that if you're not in a good state, it can be a little bit depressing, a little bit shocking. So just take care of yourself, read it whenever you want, and if it's not for you, it's fine. So I'm going to give Solitaire 3 stars out of 5. It was a good book, but it's not my cup of tea when it comes to themes and wave of narration. I was more interested in Tori's story rather than the whole thing of Solitaire in the story, and I think that the third act was very depressing and the ending was a lot. The next one is going to be a very controversial one for sure. Number 3 comes Normal People. Okay, to be fair, this wasn't the book for me. Like, I understand why people like it. I can appreciate some of the discussions that this book opens. But at the end of the day, this is a story, this is a fiction, so I really need to be interested in what's going on. I really want to care about the characters, and neither of that happened to me. This was just a depressing journey. So the story follows Connor and Marianne. Both are teenagers who attend secondary school in County Sligo in Ireland. Connor's mom works as maid in Marianne's house, and that's how the story starts. Marianne is this really weird, unlikable kid at high school that everyone ignores and doesn't want to hang out with her, whereas Connor is a really super popular, charming, cute guy that everyone wants to be around. So something happens, they break up, but then they meet again in college and they reconnect, and there Marianne is super popular and there Connor is not so popular, is struggling with university and living in Dublin and the people in there. And this dynamic goes on throughout the book, like until the end. It's like, I'm not going to talk about what's going on, what happens, but they always like dating and then not dating and then dating again and then not dating. And their relationship is really abusive in a way. I don't like their relationship. I don't root for them. And I really wanted them to be separated and go carry on with their lives, because they liked each other, they loved each other in a very weird and twisted way, but they were meant to each other because they were like really toxic when they were together. However, I want to say that I love how this book discussed the idea of class and how it affects the relationships, especially after the economic downturn in Ireland. So I think that it's a huge part of the dynamic between Connor and Marianne, and I think that it's really, really well executed, as well as the whole miscommunication trope that is really, really well used in here. Even though sometimes we're like, come on, you're really saying this, but you think otherwise. And especially ask for help when they needed it. That's the whole thing in this book. Especially there were 2 huge moments in which they needed help, but they didn't ask for it. And I think that then they learn how to rely on each other in a way, and I like that, how it was like an evolution of their dynamic in a kind of weird way. Be aware that this book talks about abuse, like weird family dynamics, really toxic family dynamics, suicide, depression. So take care of yourself, as I always say. Like, if you're not in a good mood, this is not the book for you. You can give it a go, but if you feel triggered, just please take your time and read it whenever you feel better and whenever you feel like you're able to. Or if not, just read a review, a spoiler review, and then you know what's going on in the story. Also, there's character choices that Marianne makes that I was like, what's going on in here? But then I get it, but at the same time, I could never connect with her. It was very difficult for me to connect with her. I like Connor, kinda, but at the same time I didn't. So yeah, they weren't like the most exciting couple for me to read about. Having said that, I'm going to give Normal People 3 stars out of 5. It was a good book, it was well written, I understand why people liked it, but it's not my cup of tea. But I appreciate it for what it is, so yeah. Next we are going to the beach because number 2 goes to Beach Read by Emily Henry. I love this book. So the story follows January Andrews, who is a romance novel writer, and she moves to North Bear Shores because she's short of money and she needs a place to live in and to write her next book because she's out of inspiration. And there she reunites with her college nemesis, Augustus Everett, who is this huge, great American novel writer, and they reconnect and we get to see how their dynamic changes throughout the book, and I really adore that. This is more of a rivals to lovers rather than enemies to lovers, but there are two people with different perspectives, mostly professionally, and how those ideas merge. And it's really interesting to see how Augustus shares with January his methods of writing, his inspiration, the way he goes and meets people, real life things, and he gets inspired by that. And then January tries to show Augustus that you can believe in love and write happily ever after stories and very romantic and full of wholesome moments. Okay, I will stop there because if not it will be spoiler territory for sure. Even though this is a romance story, I think it has a lot of layers that make it more interesting than just this plain, cheerful, wholesome love story. Even though we have these tropey moments that I loved and adored, we also have the exploration of the post-trauma of these characters and the way they cope with it, and all these huge, dark and depressing moments they have to face in order to overcome all their issues. This story was so relatable, I loved it so much. I will give Beach Read 4 stars out of 5. I totally recommend it. It's a great summer read, so you will enjoy it. And having said that, let's move to number 1, shall we? So, if you have already watched my mid of the year freakout tag, you know that my number 1 book for June is going to be Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So the story follows Piranesi, a man of science who lives in this huge magical house filled with mysteries and wonders. This book is written as a journal, so we get to discover this world with Piranesi, and I think that's completely genius. I think that it works perfectly for the story that it's told. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it. You should read it. It's an amazing book. Every single thing that I can say is a spoiler because every single chapter that goes on, we get to discover a little piece of this world, a little piece of Piranesi's story and how he interacts with the house and the other characters that live inside of it. This book is the perfect fiction to depict existentialism in a way, this search of meaning that the humankind has, and the way that we interact with our environment and the way we make the best of it, or even the worst of it. Also, I think this book talks about ecology and the way that the humankind affects the ecosystem in a way. It's not as explicit, but I think that if you read it carefully, you will find what I'm talking about. The book overall, it's a little bit sad sometimes and a little bit depressing, so be careful when you're reading it. The ending is very sad in a way. Also, there's a lot of really dark moments happening, so just be aware of that. It's not a novel for kids, it's more for adults, it's fantasy for adults, but I really adore the way this book is executed and the way it's written. It's wonderful, and I think that it deserves all the praise it had. So overall, I'm going to give Piranesi 4.5 stars out of 5. I'm still saving the 5 stars for another book if it's better for me than Piranesi, but if not, in my end of the year wrap up, I'm going to give this book 5 stars because it's absolutely incredible. So that was all for today. What do you think of my ranking, of my wrap up? Did you enjoy it? Which of these books do you really want to read? Which ones do you really don't want to read? Tell me down below. Thank you so much for watching. You can also find me on Instagram if you want. Here's my username. You can follow me there to get more updates of the books I'm reading and also just like little reviews after I finish one of them. Thank you so much for your support and I see you guys the next time. Bye bye.